Hello and welcome. As India heads into festive season, the biggest question on the minds of people watching at this time is about the quality of economic recovery and the depth of economic recovery. How fast will India bounce back from the pandemic and the hit that the pandemic caused on India's economic prospects? Joining us for perspective on this is the chief economist at the International Monetary Fund, one of the world's leading economists, Dr. Gita Gopinath. Dr. Gopinath, welcome. It's great to have you back with us on India Today. The IMF just put out its latest round of projections, and you're predicting once again that India's economic growth will be at 9.5%, which would be the fastest growing world economy for 2021. Can you give our viewers a full sense of what you're thinking of the kind of economic recovery that you're picking up from India? Dr. Gopinath.
Hi, Rahul. Always a pleasure to join you. Our numbers for this year and next are unchanged from July. We have the Indian economy projected to grow at 9.5% this year and 8.5% next year. In terms of the overall prognosis of the recovery, I would say the following. One, India had a very deep recession last year, minus 7.3%. And so this is a rebound that we are seeing. But if you look at the combination of, last year and this year, the recovery, while it's certainly happening, is incomplete, and it is uneven. It's incomplete in the sense that, relative to where the Indian economy would have been in the absence of the pandemic, there is still a distance to go. You can also see that in employment numbers. And this is uneven because while there are some sectors, large firms, listed firms recovering strongly, MSMEs are still under stress. There are large numbers of people who are unemployed. You can see that when you look at access to the rural unemployment insurance schemes. So, the good news is that the recovery is continuing. There is stability. Cases have come down. COVID cases have come down dramatically. But there is still that distance that needs to be covered.
So one of the key things about projections that have been done by the International Monetary Fund is on account of various aspects of the pandemic, the first wave and later the second wave, some of the initial hopes for growth had to take a hit. How are you factoring in a possible third wave? Hopefully there won't be a third wave which is as significant as the second wave, but there is a lot of talk about the possibility and prospects of a third wave. So how, in your view, could a third wave impact the kind of growth numbers that you're putting out, Dr. Gopinath?
So this is one very large source of uncertainty in the forecast, and that's true for India, but for pretty much all of the parts of the world, which is how the pandemic will evolve. And in India, in terms of the third wave, the assumption we have is, that there will be some restrictions that will be around because of the pandemic, but nothing in terms of a broad-based shutdown of the economy, or nothing like what we saw, for instance, in the second wave in India. So that's the baseline assumption. But that is, a source of downside risk to our forecast if in case there was, say, a new virus variant that came up that led to, again, anything like what happened this past summer.
So you're speaking of India growing at 9.5%, possibly the fastest growing world economy. You've also in the same forecast cut China's growth projections for 2021 and 2022 by about 10 basis points each. Give us a sense of why you think China is slowing down relative to global growth.
So we have a small downward revision for China, which comes because we've seen somewhat more tighter fiscal policy than we had anticipated in China, so that is the reason, but it's a very tiny downgrade. But again, Rahul, I've said this multiple times before, to put different companies and countries in perspective, you really need to look at the cumulative impact of growth over these last 2 years. And China was one of the countries that actually had positive growth last year, while pretty much most other countries had negative growth. So these are very different recovery points. But in the case of China, fiscal tightening has been one factor. The other issue, of course, which I think poses a downside risk, is with the property sector in China. But again, that is a downside risk that we are keeping an eye on.
How are you viewing the prospects of the debt problem that China is dealing with, some of it now out in the global media, and the impact this could have on the world economy and possibly also on India?
So debt in China is very high. It's gone up dramatically, especially if you look at the corporate sector and you look at the household sector. And we've seen that in the property market. Now, the property market is a very large part of China's economy. And so when you have a hit to the property sector, that has implications. But our assumption right now is that we believe that China has the policy tools that it needs to be able to ring fence the problem, which is that, there will be some shakeup in the property sector. Evergrande is one of the biggest property developers. There will be some shakeup in the sector, but we don't expect that will have systemic effects through other sectors in China. And therefore, while it will have a softening effect on growth, we don't expect to see a big downward correction in growth for China, which of course then would have repercussions for the rest of the world, including for India. But that is not what's in our baseline.
One of the things that the IMF talks about is the importance of vaccine access. Now, there are two perspectives on this. In countries like the United States, there's talk about the need for a third booster dose, whereas large parts of Africa and Latin America are still waiting for their first dose. Can you explain to those watching why you believe that equitable access in countries where vaccine consumption has been very low so far is very critical to determining the pace of global economic growth from here?
Well, it is quite simple. This pandemic is not truly over anywhere until it's over everywhere. And a very concrete example of that is the Delta variant that, we saw it hit India severely in the months of April, May, and June. And then it shifted to different parts of the world. And with that, we have a downgrade for global growth. We have a downgrade for advanced economies of minus 0.4 percentage points. So again, this is basically tells you that if you don't get enough of the world vaccinated, you're going to end up with newer variants and you're going to risk the recovery that we are seeing. So even keeping aside the equity issues, the moral issues, I think are very important. But just from pure economic arguments, it's absolutely essential to vaccinate, large parts of the world equitably.
The other thing,
and I should mention, by the way, in this regard, I'm actually was very happy to see the Indian government announce that it's going to restart its vaccine exports in the month of October.
One of the other things your report talks about is supply chain bottlenecks. Now, one of the issues that we're facing in India is a shortage of semiconductor chips, and that's leading to a huge backlog in the ability of automobile manufacturers to deliver new cars to consumers, a huge uptake in consumption, or at least demand, on account of the festive season and the pent-up demand. So how, and this is partly linked to global supply chains, how do you see this semiconductor shortage play itself out? Do you think of this as being a temporary phenomenon, or is this something is this a problem that's here to stay?
The shortage in chips is a problem that's been around now for a while. I mean, I would say about a 12-month period that this problem has lasted. And given that it's not that easy to scale up production of chips, it will last longer. I mean, it would expect it to go into next year. But I would say that, the problem gets less severe over time. More generally, supply shocks are posing a problem. So in the specific context of India, I would also mention the coal shortages that we are seeing. And given that coal is a big part of power generation in India, that's another downside risk for the economy, I would say, in the near term.
No, so I'm coming to coal separately, but just on the question of semiconductor shortages, do you see this as being a passing phase and the availability of semiconductors increasing, or do you think that this is really a challenge, given the importance of semiconductors in the new economy, that countries like India will have to find ways of having to make their peace with and deal with?
No, there is a part of this which is transitory. Transitory not in the sense of in the next couple of months, but transitory more in the sense of a few quarters of it. I would say by the end of next year, this would be the problem would be, it would be a much easier problem to solve. There would be a lot more supply that comes on. What we've seen right now in the interim has been the disruption that's come from the fact that demand has come back very strongly after the pandemic, combined with the fact that car manufacturers didn't really expect that this demand would come back, and so they hadn't placed their contracts with the chip manufacturers, and the chip manufacturers decided to contract with other kinds of products. And so there is that mismatch that we're seeing in the chip industry. It will last for some more time. It won't go away in a couple of months, but again, in a year, we're certainly looking at this problem being resolved.
Let's now come to coal, because that's the burning issue of the day. In India, on the back of a heavy monsoon, to the extent possible, coal production is now being ramped up. But this is also linked to global coal prices increasing and the larger issue of producers wanting to move away from fossil fuels towards clean energy and therefore not ramping up coal orders. But in the immediate, it's fossil fuels and coal that is driving the large part of power generation. How do you see this play itself out over a short and medium term?
So this is, like I said, this is a near-term risk for India. Again, demand for electricity comes back up quickly. Coal supply doesn't come back as fast, and you have the heavy rains, the limited production supply, and so there is going to be this transition period where if this continues, then that could end up with having power shortages and power outages, which then, of course, poses a headwind to the recovery. Now, again, these are supply problems, some of which should be smoothed in the coming months. More generally, what is needed, of course, is a much more resilient infrastructure for renewable energy. I think there is a lot more innovation that's needed on that front, especially with respect to storage of renewable power. We just don't have the right technology for it. But that is exactly what's needed to ensure that you don't have these very volatile swings in energy prices otherwise.
Outside of the economic outlook that you've just put out, the Indian government has announced that Air India is being privatized at long last, going back to the House of Tatas. You've been pushing for privatization of government assets. That finally seems to be coming through. Are you hoping that this heralds a new beginning? What do you think of the belated privatization of the Maharaja and about the government's new plans to monetize some of its assets?
I think this is highly welcome, the privatization of Air India. I mean, in general also, I think it's about 19 years since there's been privatization that's happened in India. So this signals very strong commitment from the government towards privatization, and I think it's overall very, very welcome.
Okay, and this whole national monetization plan, it's not an outright sale of assets, rather a long-term lease to private players in the hope that that can lead the government to generating new funds to actually be able to fund some of its social projects.
Exactly. I think what is good about this is that you're raising the revenue that you need to undertake other kinds of essential public investment, including in terms of the human sector, health sector, education. And so I think that is indeed what is needed. I mean, Air India has been a loss-making enterprise for many, many years, and it was time for this to happen. I mean, it's overdue, but I am glad that it finally did happen.
Let's now talk a bit about the downside risks. One of the concerns in India is about growing inflation. The IMF is increasing its inflation forecast for India to 5.6% from 4.9%. How worried are you about inflationary risks at this moment, Dr. Gopinath?
I would say it is a concern. Headline inflation, as I just saw the numbers that came out yesterday, have come back down further because of the reduction in food price inflation. But the problem is with core inflation. And core inflation has been very sticky. It's still at around 5.8% at the upper band of the target range. And there are still inflationary forces in the system, including in terms of energy prices. There are still pressures that are there. So this is what we're seeing in India is a much more broad-based inflationary pressure. So that is a concern. This poses, I would say, some tough policy challenges because on the one hand, you have output and employment still well below where it should be. And so therefore the economy still needs support, but then you have to worry about inflation at the same time. I think the RBI's policy of currently being accommodative is the right thing to do, but they have to keep a very close eye on what's happening to inflation dynamics because, like I said, it's just uncomfortably sticky at the top end.
So one is the food inflation, the other is crude prices, expected to breach $90 a barrel by the end of the year. Some are saying $100 by December. In that context, huge pressure on the Indian government to review its tax petroleum policies. How concerned would you be about global crude oil prices and the impact that some of this could have on India's growth prospects, ma'am?
So in addition to coal, I would say that this increase in oil prices is a downside risk for the Indian economy in the near term. Now, if you look at futures prices and what you expect to see, again, there is a big transitory element to this. By the middle of next year, again, most of these prices are supposed to be back down. Once you cross winter, anyway, you get this decline in prices. So again, there is an important transitory element to it, but given that India is an important importer of oil, this poses a headwind to the recovery.
Let's speak for a moment about employment numbers. The latest data that's been put out by the Center for the Monitoring of the Indian Economy puts unemployment on the 7th of October nationally at 6.7%, in urban areas at 8.1%, rural at 6.1%. What policy measures would you advocate to the Indian government to try and deal with some of the unemployment that continues to remain high?
So, as the Indian economy recovers, and now we've seen coming out of the second wave, we are seeing signs of recovery in manufacturing and recovery in services. That itself will help over time bring back give jobs to more people. But at the same time, what's underlying a bit of the recovery, and this is something that even preceded the pandemic, is the weakness overall in terms of consumption and in investment. So in terms of what could be the forces of growth for India in the next few years, it would be the export sector and it would be public sector investment. So public sector investment would be another channel through which you can do a lot of job creation, and through that, again, reduce unemployment in the country. And also not just unemployment, but making sure that people who left the labor force return back to the labor force, which is kind of what we are seeing in India, that that return back is not happening fully yet.
So you deal with the preparation of the World Economic Outlook, but the IMF, the body that you work with, finds itself, Dr. Gopinath, at this moment in the eye of a global storm about allegations of allegedly rigging data, specifically when it comes to the ease of doing business rankings. How do you, and I know that you can't speak so much for the institution, but how do you view the charges that are being leveled, the data rigging charges, which are questioning a lot of the past data that's been put out and the credibility of the numbers that go out from the IMF and the World Bank?
So Rahul, firstly, let's get the facts right. The facts are about data issues that was at the World Bank. So these are the Doing Business report is put out by the World Bank Group. These are Doing Business rankings that are put out by the World Bank Group. So this has nothing to do with IMF data or IMF forecasts. So let's be very, very clear about that. Now, at the IMF, we take data integrity incredibly, it's hugely important. It is our bread and butter, so we pay a lot of attention to it. What that basically means is that we have a lot of checks and balances in putting out our forecasts or our reports. We have multiple economists in multiple departments that review them, provide detailed comments, and there's a whole paper trail in terms of who decide, of changes that are being made. So there are lots of checks and balances that we have in the system to make sure that our data is trusted, which is exactly what we need, given that is one of the core things that we do at the IMF.
Okay, and finally, before I end, what's your sense of how the rest of the world is viewing the India story at this moment? India trying to bounce back on the back of this second wave. There are concerns in China about debt, about growth. You were talking about the possibility of using this as an inflection point for India. How are you and other people that you're speaking to viewing the India story at this moment, Dr. Gopinath?
India has always been viewed as a promising story. The promise of India has always been held very highly, and that remains the case. We had the India had a very bad second wave, where we're seeing the economy recover from it. There is resilience in the economy, but at the same time, there are important structural issues that still need to be addressed, and public infrastructure is an important part of it, but also the health of the financial sector is also another part. So there are roadblocks. I would also mention human capital, education. The hit to education that's happened during this crisis has been immense. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done. But India has a young population, young demographics, large labor force. It is a promising destination for many people.
It's very difficult to put out numbers when a lot of the assumptions on which your projections are based are being changed constantly because of a pandemic. I'm sure you're hoping, as is the rest of the world, that the assumptions that you've made based on how things are is roughly the way it stays. Would you say that this is one of the toughest things to do when there's so many moving variables to try and project into the future what economic growth could look like, Dr. Gopinath?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've spent a lot of time talking to health experts and understanding what the new Merck drug can do, in addition to the standard economic forces. But again, I think what's important to keep in mind is the point of a forecast is also to signal to policymakers the general direction in which you think the economy is headed, and therefore to take appropriate actions to correct that. And so I'm always very happy when exposed to have to come back and upgrade my forecast because certain actions that had to be taken were taken. The hard part is when you end up with bad news with the virus and then you end up with bad luck and you have a downgrade.
Well, last we spoke was when the second wave was just about taking off. That's when there was bad news on the horizon. Now we've got the festive season around the corner and numbers are coming down. We hope that your upgrade is the way it stays. Deeply appreciate you joining us. All the best for the festive season. Dr. Gita Gopinath for joining us on the Newstrack. Thank you so much.
Thank you.